Alrighty, good afternoon, folks. 1 p.m. is upon us, and the countdown timer tells me it's time to get stuck in. So you're all very welcome today. Both of those who are joining us for your very first UX Bites, and those of you who have joined and supported us before. Super to have you all with us this lunchtime for our last quarterly webinar of the year. Can't quite believe that. So our topic for the next 45 minutes is the true return on investment of user experience. And we want to focus in on how we might convince internal stakeholders of that. So your hosts today are myself, Melissa Boyle, and Gareth.
Hi, folks. Good afternoon. I'm Gareth. I'm CEO at Fathom, and I'm going to be partnering up with Mel in exploring the topic during our time together.
Super. Thanks, Gareth. As always, we have a hashtag for today's webinar. That is hashtag UX Bites. And our Twitter handle is @Fathom_UX. So if you find any of the information we share today interesting, please do share and tweet us. Okay, so here's how the next 45 minutes or so is shaping up. I'm going to finish up just setting the scene pretty shortly. Then we're going to dive into the language of persuasion. We're going to chat a little bit about the experience economy. And then lastly, just before getting into some case studies and takeaways, we're going to explore how data and insight work together. And then just for the last 15 minutes of our time together today, we're going to get into questions and answers. So please do feel free to pop your questions in the little question box as they come to you. We might not get through all of them today, but we will do our very best. And the ones that we don't get to, we will follow up on our blog. All right, so I'm going to hand over to Gareth just to get into the language of persuasion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mel. And as we kind of start the topic, let me kind of just share a few initial thoughts on it. I think the big one is that many people involved in the UX industry want to champion the discipline and can see the benefit of the discipline. And one of the challenges that we have is that we've got to persuade people who either know less about UX or don't care about UX. We've got to persuade them that this thing that we feel very positively about is something which is worth investing in. So it's a universal challenge, and the good news is that lots of people have spent a lot of time thinking about how we can overcome that challenge. Speaking personally, I spend a huge amount of my time when I'm not leading the business or when I'm not delivering webinars such as this. I spend a lot of my time selling. So whilst a lot of UX professionals invest time in persuading internal colleagues, I find myself spending a lot of time persuading external clients and external colleagues. So what I want to do is I want to share some of the things which have been effective and helpful for me in the 10 years that I've been doing this. And I want to take them from an external context and think about how they apply internally. So let me go through a couple of principles, kind of paint the story as I go, and then we'll get to some kind of maybe takeaways and some thoughts just as we close off. The first thing that I want us to think about is the language and the vocabulary that we use when we are persuading people of the importance of UX. And in this regard, I have to start with the heartbreaking news, which is that very few people want UX. When people invest in UX, they want what UX causes. They don't want what UX does. In other words, they want the impact of your work. They want the outcome of your work as opposed to the work itself. And so the first thing I want to think about as we talk about how we sell or persuade internal colleagues to embrace UX, the first thing that I want to think about is how we talk about it and how we frame it and how we couch it. Because as I say, people are wanting what UX can do for them as opposed to the specific ingredients of what makes up UX itself. I think the best way that I can explain this is to use one of the best known quotes from UX. This quote is used all the time, and it's a really helpful quote in the context of problem solving. So you might well have heard UX professionals quote Theo Levitt when he says, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill bit, they want a 1/4-inch hole. And if you've heard me speak on this before, and I speak on it fairly regularly, I sometimes argue that people don't want a 1/4-inch hole, they want to hang a picture. Or they don't want to hang a picture, they want a beautiful room. Or they don't want a beautiful room, they want a beautiful home. and so on. So it doesn't really matter how far you take the quote. For me, the quote is about the importance of abstraction and the importance of context. In other words, the quote is about understanding how the thing which you produce fits into the world of the person you're producing it for. So this quote for me is about the pursuit of context. So I hope I'm not butchering the quote when I evolve it to say that your colleagues don't want user experience. The colleagues who you want to persuade almost definitely want more sales, a lower cost of serving your customer. They want more leads. They want to be more competitive against competitors. They want to increase conversion. They want to up average order size. They want to increase the number of users filling their basket, and so on. So the first thing to say is when we are talking about UX, it's very important to make sure that we begin the conversation with the thing that your colleague wants. So we don't start by saying what we can do. We start by anchoring what we do in the context of what they want. Because those of you who are involved in UX will know that UX has got lots of really brilliant things to say around sales, cost of service, lead generation, competitive advantages, increased conversion. UX has lots to contribute, but we start with what the colleague wants rather than what that we can do. And in order to do that, there are a number of things that we need. We need the human stories that go behind those behaviors, and we need the data to support those human stories. So let me tease out what I mean by that. We all live in what I have come to call the experience economy. Particularly in the world of digital, we live in an environment where when we look at all of the digital leaders, when we look at the world's leading digital brands, a critical element of how they have reached their dominant position is the quality of the experience that they give to the user. And in this experience economy, what we find is organizations who invest in user experience win, and organizations who underinvest in user experience tend not to win. So bad UX comes at a price, and it comes at a price because the users that we are seeking to persuade to buy or to use us rather than competitors, they're used to being really well looked after by the world's leading digital platforms. So whether those platforms are Uber or Twitter or Facebook or Google Maps or Apple or with any number of digital leaders, their users are used to being really well looked after. Now, the importance of stressing the price of bad UX is a new phenomenon. In other words, it was easier to identify poor customer experience 20, 30, 40 years ago. And let me illustrate what I mean by giving you a very simple example from the world of banking. So I've got a slide here of one of the world's most famous bankers. This is David Rockefeller, who would have built his career in banking in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the early 80s. And he would have been responsible for growing the Chase Manhattan Bank, from acquiring other banks, and from really setting that bank apart in American financial services folklore. Now, as Rockefeller was going up through his career, he would have been in situations where on a daily basis, he was interacting with customers. So when he was a teller, he would be interacting with customers every day. When he became a manager, he would regularly have been on the bank floor, seeing how the tellers under his watch were looking after customers. When he then moved into senior management, he would again have come into contact with customers as he bumped into them. And so he would very quickly be able to get a flavor for how well his bank was looking after customers. And so if he saw a teller who was being unhelpful or who was being rude or who was being brusque or impolite, he could immediately see it happening in real time. He could identify it and he could do something about it. In other words, in banking, like in many other organizations, long before the digital revolution came along, people who were responsible for leading those organizations were naturally coming into contact with customers all day, every day. So the price of bad experience was apparent because his customers would have known him. He would have got a grumpy phone call from his local customer if the customer had been let down. He would have bumped into another customer at the golf club on a Friday night who would have been quick to let him know what he thought of the service if it wasn't good. So pre-digital, the price of bad experience just naturally was available in real time, in full sight, to those who were interested in finding it out. And so for people such as Rockefeller, he knew that he wanted to build his bank around his customers. So he walked the floor and could see how customers were being treated. Even to this day in a hospitality setting, I must confess, I have a real soft spot for the restaurant owner or the hotel manager who walks the floor, the ones who get into the bar, get into the restaurant, make sure that everything's going okay, because they're the ones who know what it's really like. So the point that I'm making is that in a non-digital world, the price of bad customer experience and the opportunity of good customer experience is almost self-evident, because the people who are leading those organizations are bumping into customers all day, every day. But that story that I've told you is from banking in the 1970s. If we have a look at banking in 2021, what you'll see is that across most banking product lines, the majority of customers don't access that service by walking into a bank. They access that service via a digital product. So the modern day equivalent of David Rockefeller doesn't bump into his customer in the forecourt. He doesn't know who his customer is in the golf club on a Friday night, because his customers are all distant from him. His customers are all distant by physical location, and they're distant across wires and lines and technology. And his customers don't determine how well they're being looked after by how polite or helpful a human is. They determine how well they're being looked after by how effective and efficient and straightforward and intuitive the interfaces and the products and the experiences on those digital channels are. So the first thing we've got to do, if we're going to persuade our customers, if we're going to persuade our internal stakeholders about the importance of UX, is we've got to get them back to the front line. David Rockefeller was in the front line every day he came into work. He saw his customers every day. The people who you're trying to persuade probably don't see their digital customers every day, and it's our job to get them there. It's our job to let them know what it's like to be a digital customer. Here's another example of how digital financial services delivery is getting increasingly digital. And one of the ways that we get our colleagues to the front line is that we remind them that even though we may look at data on a graph such as this one, behind every single data point is a user trying to get something done, is a user trying to consider what you have on offer and deciding whether or not they're going to buy from you. I share this story often. It's a personal story, and it involves this gentleman in the middle who's my father, Brian. This is me on the left and my brother, Tony, on the right. So my dad is a retired architect, and one of the things that he loves to do is to travel. He's a very social man, and pre-COVID, he was rarely at home because he was either going on a cruise, going on a golf trip, or he was using his free train ticket to get train journeys all over Ireland. And he did a lot of the research himself to buy his plane ticket, to check in for his flight, to research his cruises, to find out the timetable for the train. He did all that stuff himself. But sometimes he would phone me because he was stuck. You know, I'd ask him, well, how are you getting on, Dad? Well, I'm a bit stuck. I can't check in for the flight. I can't find the timetable, whatever. So he lives near where we live. And I would always say, no problem, I'll call round and see you and we'll get it fixed. So I would call round to his house. And every time I did, the same little drama unfolded in my dad's kitchen. I would sit down at the computer. I would have a look at what was going on. Dad would make some coffee. A few minutes later, he would bring the coffee over and he would ask me how I'm getting on. Usually I'm making some progress. So I would say, yeah, I'm making a bit of progress, Dad. It looks like we've got it sorted. And he would often say the same thing. He would often say, I just can't do it. I'm stupid. I'm stupid. Now, you wouldn't in your wildest dreams call my dad an IT expert, but neither would you call him stupid. He's a perfectly intelligent man. He's a retired architect. He's used his brain his whole life to make his living. But an experience has occurred that has left him feeling stupid, frustrated, confused. And as I look at that little scenario playing out in my dad's kitchen, I can't help but ask the question, what has caused the confusion? Where has the breakdown occurred between the human and the computer? And I can't help but think that if the people who wrote that website or built that experience had spent just half an hour in my dad's kitchen, they could have built an experience which wouldn't have left him feeling confused or stupid. It would have left him feeling in control and empowered. And if they had done that, he would have carried that out himself and he would have confidently accessed the service. Because if they had known that, they would have known the steps that my dad expected to go through to buy his flight. They would have known the queries he had on step 1, that if he didn't get them answered, he wasn't going to go on to step 2. They would have known the queries in step 2, that if he didn't get them answered, they would have gone to step 3. They would have seen that when they tried to upsell him hold luggage, he got confused because he thought he had already checked his golf clubs in, and so on. And so there's an example of a bad experience that those of us involved in user experience, we won't find those out unless we have the humility to go and observe and to see what it's really like to be a customer trying to access our digital product. So for those of us trying to persuade internal stakeholders of the importance of UX, we've got to get them to the front line. We've got to get them video footage and audio footage. We've got to get them heat maps. We've got to get them session cam information. All of the stuff that lets you let your colleagues know what it's actually like to use your product is gold dust. Because what it means is that you're using your customer to bat on your behalf as you build up the business case. And this phenomenon, this challenge is not unique to my dad. One of the things that I do when I'm delivering training is I ask this question: when was the last time the internet made you feel angry? Maybe you were on a website or an app and it caused you to feel rage. And just as I explain this slide, if any of you have felt angry recently online, would you be kind enough to just write into the chat what it was that made you feel angry? Because the reason this is important is I have asked this question to 1,000 people in at least a dozen countries. And usually when I ask the question, most of the hands in the room go up. And I ask people what made them angry. And they tell me that they're trying to find the timetable, they're trying to download the boarding pass, they're trying to book the flight, they're trying to book the concert, they're trying to buy the product. No one has ever said they're trying to unlock the nuclear codes. Everyone's just trying to do regular stuff. And so it's your job and it's my job to get to the front line, to see them and catch them in the moment of their frustration so that we can understand why they're being frustrated and we can do something about it. So that's a little bit about the human story behind the importance of experience and how experience and its importance has diminished as we've moved into the digital realm, because those who hold budget and those who lead organizations are not as close naturally to the customer as they used to be. And it's our job to get them back there. But the second thing that we do in building up the story is we not only paint a picture about the price of bad UX, we invest in outlining the opportunity cost of good UX. And I want to talk a little bit about the importance of data and metrics and insights in building up that business case. The business case is based on a quadrant, a landscape, which we have looked at before in the world of UX Bytes, and it is Christian Roher's landscape of user research methods. We've been through it before, and I don't plan, you'll probably be glad to hear, to go through it today. But what I do want to do is I want to talk a little bit about this quadrant. This quadrant is both quantitative and behavioral. So what that means in straightforward language, it is quantitative, in other words, it is measuring patterns, and it is behavioral, in other words, it is observing how users are behaving. So it records their behavior and not their opinion. And the business case for UX always lives in this quadrant, because the business case says, we have a metric which is sitting at this number. We want to get that metric to sit at this number, and the price of getting from here to here is the price of the project. And the return to the company is much greater than the price of the project. That's how the business case works. So to make that business case, it's really critical to make sure that you invest in your data layer. Because if you don't invest in your data layer, you cannot build the business case in language that your stakeholders can understand. You know, I go back to what your stakeholders want. They want more sales. They want a lower cost of serving. They want a better conversion ratio. They want a higher average order value. They want a lower cost of acquisition. They want to make their campaigns efficient. They want to build brand. They want to ward off competitive threat. If we are to talk about UX in those terms, we've got to invest in a rich data layer that doesn't just tell us what's going on in terms of bits and bytes, but also tells us what's going on in terms of some of those really commercial metrics. So the price of attention, the price of conversion, the price of someone landing on the site, the difference in price between channels. All of these things are critical if we're going to build up an effective business case for UX. So the second thing that I want to say as I think about building up that case to persuade stakeholders to get involved in UX, the second thing is that we invest in the data layer, because the data layer is the bridge which allows you to make the connection from the ones and zeros, the hard technical data that comes from analytics, and the things that matter to your stakeholders and colleagues. So those analytics and A/B tests are examples of the hard metrics that we can use in order to persuade colleagues, but there are also soft metrics as well, which apply in other scenarios, and Mel's going to talk us through those.
Super, thank you, Gareth. Yeah, so just thinking about how we can get our colleagues to the front line and beginning to think about how data and insight can support us. There's a number of different frameworks and methods that we can use to do that. One that we like and use at Fathom is the HEART framework, and it was developed by Google. So it's a really great tool for designing discussions for product and marketing teams. And really what it does is it brings business metrics into the design process. So in short, the data that you collect helps you to have more fruitful discussions, and it's a really powerful tool to support design decisions as well. Let me just chat you through those 5 key metrics used in the framework. Happiness, as you might expect, is the measurement of attitude or satisfaction. So that's really about asking ourselves how users feel about our products. And it is typically measured by user satisfaction surveys, app ratings, reviews, and net promoter scores. Looking then at engagement, that's the measurement of how a user interacts with the product. So how often people are coming back to use it. And again, engagement can be measured by more kind of data points around the number of visits per week, session length, or some key actions that we want to follow. So for some of the giants like Instagram, that might be the number of photos uploaded, or for Spotify, it could be songs listened to per user per day. Moving on then to adoption, it's primarily defined as the number of new users over a certain time frame. So how many people complete the onboarding process and become regular users. It is also measured by the number of new users over a period of time, or percentage of customers using a new feature. So that might be useful if you're rolling out something new to a product. Just looking then at retention, that's quite self-explanatory. It's about the percentage of users that are returning to the product. And as you can imagine, that is measured by churn. And very lastly, task success is really about asking ourselves how users achieve their goal or task, and how quickly and easily it is for them to do so. So that's measured by factors like efficiency, how long it takes to complete the task, and effectiveness, the percentage of tasks completed, alongside the error rate too. So the HEART framework can pretty much be applied to either just one single feature on your app or product, or it can be kind of rolled out across the whole gig. We find it really useful because it's quite simple and easy to understand, and it really makes communicating reasons for key decision making clear and easy across different teams that may not be as involved or as close to the product as we are as designers. So this little slide just kind of gives us a look at what that might look like in practice. With each of the elements, we set goals, signals, and metrics. So our goals are what we want to achieve, and then we define signals, and that really allows us to understand what types of things should be happening if our hypothesis is correct. Finally, then, our metrics are things that we can monitor in real time on a dashboard. So there's lots of detail that we could go into on this. There's loads of really great resources online, and I would encourage you to have a look at some of those. But certainly when thinking about how we can really report back to our internal stakeholders on tangible results and actions, this framework, the Heart one by Google, is a really clear and simple one. So I'm going to hand over back to Gareth just to chat through some case studies.
Lovely. Thanks, Mel. Okay, the case study that we're going to share is one that we shared about 1.5 years ago in one of the early UX Bites, but it was so relevant. We just felt it was the key one to kind of bring back, because it's got lots of the different ingredients. It's got the hard data stuff. It's got some of the commercial stuff wrapped in. It's got some elements around the price of bad UX. It's got some competitor and competitive elements to it as well. And finally, it's got some humanizing pieces because we were able to get the client to the front line. So it's got all the ingredients that we've talked about. And the case study comes from The Week. The Week is an online and print publication which is focused around lots of things to do with the world of marketing. And when we engaged with The Week, their conversion rate from their digital product to their printed product was 3.68%. They got in touch with us because they thought 3.68% was low. They couldn't be sure that it was low, but their hunch, their intuition was telling them that it was certainly worth exploring. And they asked us to help them put together a business case for conversion improvement. So one of the first things that we did was we explored that data layer to see if we were potentially leaving money on the table. And here's what we found. When we had a look to see the conversion rate of their most immediate competitor in the UK, Great Magazines, we could certainly see that Great Magazines was converting about 3 to 4 times more than they were. So that would certainly suggest that, yes, they were leaving money on the table. When we then look, compare it with some of the better performing publications in the States, we could see that a report by Marketing Sherpa said that the conversion rate for some of the best performing publications in the States was way up into 22%. So whatever way you want to look at it, whether in terms of data or in terms of money, it was very clear that the hypothesis that the team at The Week had about their subscription process being underperforming was absolutely correct. So what we then did was we began to explore how we could begin to articulate that, not in terms of ratios, but in terms of pounds and pence. So what we did was we had a look to see what amount of revenue was generated from this 3.68%, which The Week was providing, and it was 54k. And we asked ourselves the question, what would that go to if we were able to match Great Magazines? And you can see it went up to 162k. And then we asked, what would it be like if we were able to match Sherpa Marketing's exemplar examples? And that went up to 22% or 334k. So what immediately becomes clear is that there's tangible commercial business opportunity that is being lost because of the price. That's the price they're paying for poor UX. So if we try to compare it and put it in pounds and pence per month, we can see that versus Great Magazines, we think we're leaving over 100 grand on the table per month and over 1 million on the table per year. If we have a look at it against Sherpa Marketing, then the numbers are absolutely astronomical. So this is a lovely example where the business case gets very, very strong very, very quickly. And so if we summarize the target that we had set, which was to get to 8%, you can see that there's a desire to get from 54 to 120k per month, and from 657 to 1.4 million per month. So you think about the budget that frees up for UX. Even if they were to invest $250,000 in UX, you can see that the business case around that is very strong. So they've got the sense that this 8% is achievable, and they've got the levers that they can get to in order to get there. But what was really interesting then was when we also brought the customer to the front line and we married up that analytics element with some of the usability testing element. And let me just show you some of the, I'm going to play you some videos here of some of the usability feedback that we got on the site, and then I'm going to summarize it. This is the screen that you arrive at if you click the banner that you're interested in getting 6 free issues of The Week. Let's hear what users had to say about that screen.
I don't see any prices here. go. So I guess what I'm thinking is I'm slightly frustrated that I don't see any prices on this page. Test, I'd be sort of slightly overwhelmed by this page. It just feels like there's too much information here. Also, I'm wondering in the back of my mind about this 6 free issues, then 31.25. On other sites I've had to put credit card information in before getting the free issues, and that always worries me. Because I worry that I'll forget about my card and then I'll just be put on the paid plan. So,
okay, so there's some examples of what customers are directly telling us from the front line, that there are prices missing in the previous screen which needs to be there, and that the screen that you see at the moment is asking the users to do too many things at the same time. It's asking them to use the plan along with their payment method, and it's not making it particularly clear what the different options are. As well as that, it's not dealing with any of the user's concerns or fears, in this example, to do with credit cards. So straight away, by getting the client to the front line, they're able to see not just what the conversion ratio is, but they're able to get really important clues as to why it is as low as it is, because the flow that they have designed simply isn't solving user problems. It's not answering user questions. I was in the room when this was presented to the senior team at the week, and the temperature in the room was beginning to rise as we were playing this back, and people were getting increasingly compelled to action. But the video, which was which blew the whole thing wide open, was the one that I'm going to show you now, because we ran these usability tests not just on their site, we also ran them on their immediate competitor website called Campaign. So let me play one of the clips that we saw when users tried to do the same task on the Campaign website.
So subscribe to the online option. Is it? Okay, first of all, I thought it's better in that now I can see here it's told me options and what the costs are immediately. So this is
what you can see is that we're starting to get clues as to why their immediate competitors are so outperforming them, because users are saying so. And certainly in the room when they saw them perform so poorly and users consistently being so pleased with their competitor offering, the desire to act was very, very strong, and people felt compelled to do something about it. So those are some of the things that we think about when we're thinking about how to manage return on investment and how to persuade stakeholders as to how they can achieve that. If I can just summarize with the usual takeaways, here's the key things we would really encourage you to embrace. Number one, pay your data debt today. The data is where you go to stop talking in your language and start talking in stakeholders' language. Number two, use that data to talk in the language of your colleagues. Number 3 and 4, paint the opportunity cost for good experience and try to articulate the price of bad experience. And the final thing then is humanize the business case. Recognize that behind every piece of data is a human being who's trying to get something done. And that thing may be wanting to buy from you or generate a lead or self-serve. Make sure you make that easy for them. Okay, folks, so thanks for sticking with us. That is us through the formal part, and I think this brings us nicely to Q&A.
It does, super. Thank you, Gareth. Yeah, maybe just before we get into Q&A, there's a big theme coming across here just with the frustrations on the internet. I think CAPTCHA has a big role to play there. So being asked to enter characters, but it's not clear whether digits should be entered. And then Sven's experience was that reCAPTCHA made him fill out the whole form 5 times because it wasn't clear enough and led to false input. So yeah, we're all together in that, I think, with CAPTCHA. Just in terms of questions, I think we've got away really lightly in this webinar. So I'll dig into one that I think probably deserves a good bit of attention. So the question is how to argue with your boss when current software sales are doing good, but it's very obvious that the product lacks a user-centered approach with all the results clearly visible. This person then goes in to say that the software is not that user-friendly, but it sells well because it's got really strong USPs compared to similar tools. So any advice on that?
Lots of legacy examples. So I think the first thing to do is just to pause for a moment and acknowledge that the product is clearly very strong functionally, and that's not easy, and that's obviously your source of competitive advantage, and that is to be congratulated. And as a result of that, I would have a lot of sympathy for your boss in the position that he or she has taken up. However, there are endless examples of organizations who have taken that gamble. And I'm going to mention two. So if I was to articulate what is going on with the challenge that you face, I'm going to abstract it a little bit, and I'm going to talk about it in product terms. Your product is banking that your competitive advantage of having additional functionality and better functionality is strong enough that it will sustain you into the long term. So the theory goes that we don't need to invest in user experience because we have all these other USPs, all these other competitive advantages that are strong enough to make up for experience. That's the, if I was to abstract it, that's the gamble your business is taking. It's the gamble which Ryanair took for years, and it is the gamble which Sage took for years. And I'm going to just articulate how it worked out for both of them. Sage, the accountancy software product, as you may know, dominated small business accounting for decades. For a long, long time, most small businesses ran their accounts via Sage. The digital revolution came along, and Sage didn't take it very seriously. Their client services and their traditional accountancy software sales were strong enough for them to say, do you know what? We don't need to worry about this experience economy. We don't need to worry about digital. We've got this thing. We are so embedded in the market. And what happened then was competitors began to spring up who recognized that a lot of what Sage did wasn't particularly amazing and could be replicated. And they said, we're going to take Sage on in terms of experience. We're going to build an accountancy product which has identical functionality to Sage, but a better experience. And so FreshBooks came along, and QuickBooks came along, and Xero came along, and slowly but surely they just ate away at Sage's lunch. And eventually, when the market dynamics changed, Sage went, oh, we better start taking this experience thing much more seriously. And they are now doing that. But they learned the hard way, and they only learned after using market share. So the first thing I would say is that the conceptual gamble that your business is taking is that those functional advantages that your software has, you will have in perpetuity. And if that's the case, well, then that business case is going to be challenging. I would suggest the history of software tells us that it's unlikely that you'll have those competitive advantages in perpetuity. Let's think about Ryanair. For the first 20 years of its life, Ryanair's message to the market was, where we are cheap, and we're the cheapest and most reliable airline in Europe, and that is what you get. The experience isn't great; it's a bit rough and ready, but you will be on time, and you will be cheap. What then happened was that lots of other airlines got close to them in terms of reliability and got close to them in terms of price. So people started saying, do you know what? EasyJet is 30 quid more, but they're nice to me when I check in. Or Aer Lingus is 50 quid more, but it's a nicer experience. I'm going away for the weekend with my missus. I'm going to pay the extra 50 quid because I just want a nice experience. And Ryanair recognized that the tipping point came where their competitors got close enough to them in competitive advantage that parts of the market said, do you know what? I am prepared to pay a bit extra just to have a nicer experience. And so Ryanair had to change in order to try and make their experience better. I let you judge if they've got very far with that or not, but their strategy changed about 5 years ago, and they stated that they wanted to put experience at the center of their product. So again, if you put it back in the language of the 4 Ps of product design, or the 4 Ps of marketing, or you articulate it in terms of competitive advantage, the gamble that you take is that the current competitive advantage that you have is going to be sustainable enough to look after you in the long term. And I think the history of technology is that is a gamble that few organizations can afford to take. So I'm not sure if that helps you in your liaison with your boss, but that's how I would see it in conceptual terms.
Super, thank you. And I think we have time just to cover one more. The question is, it's clear that when there's sales or money or a clear KPI involved, it's much easier to convince the boss, but how might we convince him to invest time in UX when we're speaking about internal systems, SaaS, for example?
Yeah, so the business case for internal systems usually is a function of task completion time multiplied by employee time. So the business case for internal systems goes as follows. We currently have 1,000 employees. Each of them carry a certain task 5 times a week. The average time that it takes them to carry out that task is 10 minutes. Therefore, the cost to the business in salary terms is 1,000 employees times 5 times a week times whatever time it takes to do each task. And an amount of money will fall out of that based on the salary of the people who work in the business. The business case then says, if we get that task completion time from 20 minutes to 10 minutes, or from 10 minutes to 5, or from 5 to 2, well, then that salary cost, then the staff cost to complete that task reduces by ABC, staff morale goes up by ABC, the cost of the business goes down by ABC, and the business case is built up that way. So the internal business case is usually built up as a function of staff morale plus task completion time, which is typically expressed in salaries.
Super, thank you. Okie doke. So just to wrap up, thank you again, everyone, for your time this afternoon. We will answer those questions and get them up on our blog. If you'd like early access to that, you can get it by signing up at fathom.pro/sign up. We don't have our next webinar in the diary just yet, so please keep your eye on social media in the new year when we release the next webinar date. We also will follow up with a survey today, so if you can spare 2 minutes, we'd really love your feedback on thoughts on what content you'd like us to cover in the future. So yeah, thanks again for joining. Have a really magical Christmas, stay safe, and we'll see you in the new year for some more UX Bites action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, folks.